So for barley for 2014, first off, we're going to go through how they figure your base price on the feed barley or the non-malt side of the insurance here. So your base price is based off of 91% of the September corn futures. That number might change to 89% next year. I don't believe it's a set percentage. They actually adjust that from year to year. So, but this year we're 91% of the September corn futures. The reason for that is that feed barley and corn track each other relatively closely because they're both feed based products for livestock feed. So that puts your base price at only 403 a bushel this year versus what was like 524 a bushel last year for barley for 2014, just because corn had dropped so much. The one option that people usually look at doing on barley is the malt barley endorsement, which is available whether you choose yield protection or revenue protection. Like I said, most of you would end up doing yield protection, or I mean revenue protection on this insurance, but you can do it with either option. It only pays when the quality of your barley is below the following specifications. So if your contract says 80 plump on it to make malt, and you end up at 78 and they reject the barley, in order to get paid on the crop insurance side of things, we have to be below 75. So it's important to understand there are some scenarios where there could be kind of a gray area in here, where you might get your barley rejected because it doesn't meet contract specs, but it doesn't fall low enough on our scale to get paid on the insurance. So there's the first thing to understand about the malt endorsement. And same thing with protein. A lot of the contracts might say 13 protein. You have to be above 13.5 on the crop insurance to get paid. And then, of course, test weights, thins, sprout, all those factors are taken into account, which is probably the more likely scenario would be a fair amount of sprout, especially in a rain situation, and that you could qualify for easily. So the first thing is, how do I qualify for this option B, or the additional malt coverage on the crop insurance? So to qualify, first off, sometime in the last 3 crop years in which you grew barley, excluding the most recent crop year, you had to have not only contracted barley, but delivered 75% or more of your contracted bushels in that year. So we need proof in the form of settlement sheets for, just as an example, we couldn't use 2013 for this 2014 crop year, but we could use 2012, 2010, or 2011. Or even farther back, if the last time you grew malt barley was back in 2000, we could use that. It just has to be one of the last 3 years you grew malt barley. You'd have to pick one of those years, preferably the one that you had the most contracted bushels that would satisfy this, and prove to us that you had contracts that year and that you delivered on 75% or more of your contracts. So how many bushels can you insure in this current crop year? We can insure up to 200% of the contracted bushels that you had in the year we used to qualify. So we'll go through a scenario here, but let's say in 2011 you had 100,000 bushels contracted. You delivered 90,000 bushels on the contract that year as malt. So you're at 90% of what the contract was for that year. So that's above the 75%. So you would have qualified. Now going forward in this current crop year, we can insure up to 200% of the 100,000 bushels we had contracted for our qualifying year. So if we had the 100,000 bushels in 2011 that was contracted that we satisfied the requirements on, going forward we could use up to 200,000 bushels of contract in this current crop year to add on top of your insurance. So like I said, you must have a malt contract for the current crop year to qualify. And then the most we can insure above that feed-based price, or that 403 a bushel for this year, is an additional $2 a bushel above that base price. So you could go up to 603 a bushel on the crop insurance side of things for additional coverage for the malt. What are the advantages of the malt endorsement? Obviously this year, especially with the feed price being so low, is to increase the total coverage of barley you have seeded. Your coverage that's added on the malt side is the difference between the contract price and the 403 base price, up to $2 a bushel. That difference is what will be paid if your barley does not make malt and you have to sell it as feed, as long as the feed price you sell it for is less than the base price. So we'll get into an example here, but basically if you start if all your barley gets rejected, but then the feed market runs way up, so you're selling all your feed barley for $6 a bushel, let's say next fall, even though it's rejected for malt, you would actually end up getting the difference between the $6 you sold the feed for and the initial 403 base price taken off of your malt guarantee. So it's important to understand that if not only will this possibly not pay because of some quality issues on your barley, but if you end up selling the feed for more than what the base price is and you have a fair number of bushels of barley, there's a good chance that's going to put a pretty good dent in your payment on this program. Like I said, the base price was set at 403 a bushel in this example. Your average contract price was $6. So your malt coverage then would be based off of $6 a bushel malt contract price minus the 403 a bushel feed price. So we would have an additional $1.97 a bushel guarantee on the malt side of your insurance here. What's the next step? You basically have to prove that you grew barley under contract in one of the last 3 years, excluding the most recent crop year, which we already went through here. And so this screen will probably explain it more in more clarity. But basically, by March 15th, by the end of by this deadline, we have to prove you delivered 75% or more of your contracts in one of the last 3 years you grew malt barley. So that's what you would have to do right now, or for the March 15th deadline anyways. And then going forward now, in this crop year, we can now insure 2 times what you had contracted in the year we used to qualify. So it may be that maybe you had 100,000 bushels in the qualifying year, and this year you only have 50,000 bushels in contracts. That's all we can use for your insurance would be what you currently have contracted. This 2 times number, that just tells us what the max that we could possibly do in this coming crop year would be. So next, you bring us your contracts for the 2014 crop year, or if you're watching this in later years, basically, you would bring us your contracts for the current crop year, I guess, by acreage reporting to qualify for coverage for this year. If there's a claim, you'll have to deliver all your barley before it's settled, because remember, like we said, first off, they have to prove you didn't sell it for malt, even if it was rejected by your current malt contract place, and also that you didn't sell that barley for more than what the base price is on the feed side of the insurance. And if there's a claim, you'll be paid the difference between your malt guarantee and the bushels that actually made malt. So I should have put one more spot into this slide, but basically, let's say you have 100,000 bushels of contracts that we're able to insure on your crop insurance, and 50,000 bushels actually makes malt or is sold for malt. The rest of it you had to sell for feed below what the base price or at the base price. So your guarantee would be based off of your 100,000 bushel contract times the level you pick on your crop insurance. So you'd have a 70,000 bushel guarantee for your malt side of your insurance, and this is over the whole farm. It's like one big unit. If you only sold 50,000 bushels actually for malt in the end, you would end up getting a 20,000 bushel malt barley claim times that difference from the contract price to the base price. So it's basically paying you if we have a big wreck and you aren't able to deliver on those contracts and you have to take a cheaper price for most of your barley. So the premium for option B, it's kind of an expensive insurance. The risk is relatively high for them too, of course, though, because there's multiple ways they'll have to pay you, right? So you have to pay an extra 40% above what the feed barley premium would be for the comparable liability that's there. So in other words, if we're adding another 50% of coverage to your insurance using the malt barley option, you're going to pay 50% of what your optional unit premium would be on the quote sheets that we send you times 1.4. So you're paying 40% more than you would for comparable coverage on the feed side. And we added malt lines to your quote sheets. If you guys are looking at this presentation as one of our customers, there will be highlighted lines on those quote sheets, and that'll show you what it would cost to do the malt barley option roughly for you. So the disadvantage of the malt endorsement, obviously, this is what we always want people to understand going into this. There's obviously scenarios where this could pay really well. So I never want to discourage anyone from doing it. I just want them to understand the downsides or what could happen in a claim as well. So if you sell barley that goes for feed for more than the base price, it's subtracted from your malt loss payment. It used to be that as long as the barley was rejected, they didn't care what you sold the feed barley for. It just was the fact that it was settled as feed. Now we have to sell all of our barley and then show them the settlement sheet showing them that we didn't get a big premium for it as kind of a middle between malt and feed type price. So that's where that came in. And then payment on the malt coverage will not be made until all barley is delivered. Most of you guys know that we grow barley consistently, that sometimes that can stretch way out into the spring, and so it can take a long time to settle these claims as well.